Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. I know we promised to talk Sunday, and we will, but I had a very special occasion and a very special announcement that I'm going to make today in the video, and I just had a little bit of time and I really enjoy talking to you guys. So let's talk today. We have a very important discussion to have. You know, I'm not a big fan of the Wall Street Journal, but they published a couple of articles where they have been describing the situation around the war in Ukraine, around the changing nature of the war, around how the summer campaign went in Ukraine. And I thought it was generally more or less okay, mostly because of what they're stating in the articles is nothing new. It's something that we've already have been talking a lot in our other videos, and it's also something that we knew in rumors, and they're just kind of reiterating it. And there are a couple of other facts that they're making in the articles that I know have been confirmed by other sources. So generally speaking, it's not that bad of an article, despite that it's published in Washington Post. I'm going to link the links to these articles in the comment section and in the video description so you can read along. But I want to talk about this because this is kind of important. It talks about how Ukraine and US supposedly disagreed with how to approach the offensives. In the end, Washington Post reveals this and presents it more as a number of excuses and delusions on certain perspectives on this war that are completely misunderstanding both the nature and general overview of the situation on the ground in Ukraine as well. So to go into this, we start right off where it talks about Austin talking with Reznikov after supposedly the offensive has started, and he is asking why have not Ukraine achieved significant breakthrough that they agreed. So what we need to get from this is that while Ukraine hasn't been using Western supply tactics, and we know that they haven't during the offensive, what this tells is that even by this meeting on June 15, as mentioned here above, it was still completely unclear for the US side what's the war in Ukraine is like, what's the situation on the front line is like. And we're going to talk a little bit more about details. And again, you should read the full article. It's kind of longer read, and I'm going to kind of pick up on the key points. So there were major tabletop iterations on how to do this attack. There were disagreements in what kind of approach should Ukraine take. US have been trying to push for a single attack movement, like towards one direction, whereas Ukrainians were proposing more of a three-way attack into three directions. Again, it's just a different kind of planning. It's just a different kind of perspectives. These things happens. What we need to understand, a lot of times we think in the West, like, and I think this is something that will come out of this review of these articles very clearly. We often see people that are behind closed doors. They're coming in their jackets, all serious, wearing like, serious uniforms, having serious faces, whatnot. And we're thinking that they are knowledgeable and smart and they understand everything. And what we don't understand is that maybe people that come in their battle coveralls that have seen the actual warfare unfold know it just a little bit better, and how the situation is on the front line and how specifically their army can fight it. And now the special announcement that you've been waiting for. Ukraine Matters store is now officially live. All of the goodies that you've been wanting to get and you didn't know how are here for you, available. Remember, we're also going to be doing the same with the channel, as parts of the profits will go into supporting Ukrainian armed forces. So now you don't just have to spend money and just give it to me on my YouTube channel. Instead, get something for yourself. Get yourself a bag, a pillow, whatever you like. We set it up a little. We set up a little bit of a variety of goods here, but I think you will find something for you. Especially right now, we have the Christmas collection running, so hopefully you can find something that you will like. Otherwise, please check out the store. It's really cool. We worked a lot for it, and I'm really happy that we're finally pushing it live. I am grateful for everything and everyone that supports this channel. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Let's support the armed forces together. So while there was disagreement, the key point to take away is that the plan was not shit. I see some of the analysts recently target this, saying, wow, Ukraine attacked Russian positions in the south during their offensive and they had no plan, or the plan was not thought through, or there was not enough eyes to try to challenge them on the selection of their offensive strategies and so on. No, there was significant discussions about it. Now, obviously, in the retrospective, people would want to say, oh yeah, but the US was saying that it should be just concentration on one point of attack, but we'll come back to this. So it was offensive disagreements like in these planning. It's common. Whoever have been either in a business meeting or planning any kind of operations, you know that you're talking about predicting the future. So when we're talking about certain disagreements between certain parties, that is normal. That is something that just is ongoing, and it's a working process. Every single company planner can tell you that almost never there are like a clear outline plan. Usually, even like in some better companies, they even require that there are alternative plans to kind of consider pros and cons for. And so when they're stating that that they have not been one agreed goal, I don't want you to take it as oh, this was like there was something better and was just not taken. No, there were propositions for different types, and it was then to be decided which of these options is better. There is also a little bit of a, because Washington Post is a little bit of a garbage, they're still trying to insert certain narratives, so I just highlighted this here. They're stating that morale in Ukraine is waning. Important correction here. Not in Ukraine. I talk with Ukrainians every day. I talk hopefully almost every day with Ukrainian fighters on the front line. Morale in Ukraine is not waning. Morale is being all over the place in the West. We are trying to run around like a headless chickens, trying to get an understanding how we can fight Putin, and trying to even decide whether we want to win or not win, to support Ukraine, not support Ukraine. Absolute garbage. So not in Ukraine. Ukrainians know what they need to do, especially when we're talking about military. They have a plan. They are moving towards it. They are fighting with what they have. They have weapons. They can start planning operations. They don't have weapons. Then we're going to get again to discussions. And this is something that was really staggering to me, that we are in here. It mentions that whether it will take a lot of blood or whether or not, if Ukraine succeeds, it's going to be winning of the war. And this already started kind of putting some seeds in doubt. Like, do the Americans and maybe Western analysts not understand that even if this operation would be a success, then it would not end the war? Even if Ukraine would be ultra successful, the war would still not end. And again, any plan has ability to fail. Like, again, I perceive the Ukrainian offensive as a failure, but not for what was done on the battlefield, more about the fact that they failed with the communications around it, and therefore it turned into the missed perspective of expectations. That is not the point. The point is, it's baffling to me that in these major analysts' heads were not always a sufficient plan B, saying that if whatever it is, then we will just need to understand that it will just take more time and more effort for Ukrainians to take Russians out. I truly believe that this narrative that we've heard a lot about, that In the West, they were just wanting to get into Ukraine into negotiating positions with the Russians to make sure that after Ukrainian successful offensive, they will put now Putin in a weaker positions and they will negotiate and Putin will get out of Ukraine. It really draws the picture and really hints to that narrative being still very deludedly present. So this already was a little bit of a tick that certain level of delusion is there. Now we will talk about concentration of forces. This is something that analysts that are analyzing Ukraine a little bit better, specifically Russian-speaking, the one that are understanding Russian doctrine, they're stating that a lot of these, and some of them are that analysts, I know they have seen real combat, and they have been telling this that a lot of these paper generals, like office generals to say, that they for a longer time, they really would want to be in a position as Ukraine is, that they would want to have this opportunity to win big on a battlefield. And most of the generals are preparing for the past wars rather for the present. And when they are stating that there was if they would concentrate forces into one place and then they would push all of the forces into one point strong enough, it would end up with Ukraine penetrating the forces and so on. At that moment, for me, it's acceptable. I'm not an analyst. I am a guy on YouTube. I'm just listening. But what was said was that they are still dreaming of the past warfare of how maneuvers were operating, how the specific operations were developing based on, I don't know, blitzkrieg operations, so on, with the great penetrations and so on. And when we go into this discussion, we see that even on the concept of wargaming, Ukrainians are very skeptical about it. And because probably they know, because they have been fighting this war from 2014, they have been in rail trenches and they're saying that wargaming doesn't work. Because while everyone really wants to do something nice, something, that is going to define the armies for there, a lot of US doctrine requires certain elements. We all know them. We've discussed them like many, many times. It's an overwhelming force. Its ability to dominate the skies. Its ability to deny enemy artillery and so on. If you watch like videos, I've shared videos on how to breach. Breaches were developed in the US and so on, how breaches of trenches was developed. None of them breached, for example, trenches that Russia has prepared. None of them were even expecting to do into these breaches when there was not overwhelming air advantage, and so on. We've discussed this many, many times. And the point is that there was significant factors at work here. Factor number one that I'm happy that is finally mentioned, and we knew that it's mentioned, but now I can reference it publicly, is that the training that the US and EU did for Ukrainian troops was very, very lacking. While we do know that it's good that Ukrainian forces received US and EU training, we had very unrealistic expectations of what that training involved. My big worry was that we're expecting a certain level of offensive operations, a complexity of offensive operations, whereas the training was extremely, extremely short. I remember this because when I wanted to join the military, I knew that in for example, Latvian military, if I wanted to go into like an officer school, or if I wanted to join like any kind of like a fighter brigade or whatnot, first 3 months only is me preparing like basic training. It's physical conditioning, it's like basic stuff, it's so on. So when we're talking about troops training in just like a month or two or couple of months, even with intense training, that's a very, very limited amount of information that can be taught. Good professional soldiers, especially the ones that are the core of US military, that are there to execute complex US doctrine tasks, they are not the same as those newly recruited mobilized forces that Ukraine has sent to NATO. So I believe it's good that we finally started talking about that the training that US and NATO is providing is not end all be all training. You don't get super soldiers by the end of it. You just know people how to fire, move forward, and so on. But when we're expecting certain level of complexity, then it's going to get really problematic. Then we get into the weird situation about ammunitions, which absolutely blows my mind. I'm happy that we are getting somewhere. And here it even talks about number. A bigger problem was the lack of the 155 millimeter ammunition shells, and it says that US was producing with an increase. US was producing barely a tenth of what Ukraine needed. Just stop for a second. Just 10% of what Ukraine needs. That was the level of output for US. Thankfully, they were able to reach out to South Korea. Now we know even more of South Korea providing and being literally the second biggest provider of ammunition to Ukraine. It was able to close the gap somewhat, but it was still not enough. The point that we're getting is the second one, that while US were stating that by April, and this is written in this article, that by April, Ukraine should have started their offensive, Ukraine should have advanced already and attacked Russian positions. The fact of the matter is that if you are not living in a fantasy world, like you don't even have to live in a fantasy world, go into Google, set a period of time, write Ukraine delays or Ukraine deliveries into Google, and you will see article after article after article in Ukraine stating we're not receiving what we were promised. It was as public as it gets. So when the allies are then just saying, well, we had a plan. Yeah, I know we delivered only part of it, but you already should have started the offensive anyway. We are getting into the sphere of delusions that I was really hoping was not there. I was really hoping that this was not the case. And I've heard rumors, right? But now we're talking about it written here and it's referenced around here. So if this is actually true, then this is another point into the delusion that a lot of the Western analysts, the military analysts and planners are having about the warfare and how efficient the supplies are. We know that a lot of vehicles, specifically about Bradleys, did you know that some of the Bradleys that came into Ukraine didn't have tracks on them? They came in with no tracks or damaged tracks. That was the level we're talking about. That was the level of deliveries we're talking about. The tanks that allies were delivering were not firing, like Bradleys had no tracks and so on. This is what we're talking about. We're always trying to see, it's like, oh, you know, it's only in the Europeans that when they're delivering that some of the vehicles are broken. No, it was a problem for everyone. The goal that I want, the point that I'm making here is that our armies were not ready, like our Western armies were not ready for this military offense. So the fact that we have head demanding that already body starts moving, but the conditioning is not there, we are getting again into this delusional state. Then Washington Post asks, can Ukraine win? I already mentioned this. This is the wrong question to ask because right now, the question, even in this offensive, was not about Ukraine winning. This is again coming from weird delusions about whether or not there should be some negotiations or whatnot. It's a stupid question. It shouldn't be asked. So yeah, it's a big problem. Then there was a segment about the cluster munitions. And cluster munitions, I'll remind you, would be super helpful as a part of the additional ammunition at the start of the offensive, but it arrived only in late July. That was when it arrived. But you get my point about the deliveries. And then we say, like, look, like the meeting between the Ukrainians and the Americans, like, why are you not clearing mines? Well, it's hard to explain that it's really hard. The minefields are so deep, what we already reiterated, that the mine clearing vehicles just instantly get targeted by drones and helicopters from a long distance because there is no air control. Because there is no end control. And it would be helpful, for example, to have ATACMS missiles that, I'll remind you, arrived like late August, I believe, and only then they were able to get the helicopters out of the Ukrainian hairs. So point is, this painted a very strong narratives about the fact that Ukrainians have known what's the situation like, but they were not still expecting that it's going to be this problematic, especially with the certain level of problems. We see a lot of delusion in the Western analysts in their perspective of the warfare. And here we go into the discussion of the warfare tactics, something that General Zaluzhny was stating. This second part of the article talks about Ukrainian offensive, and specifically I like this point because I think it demonstrates the genius of General Zaluzhny specifically. So in this passage it reads that Zaluzhny, in 4 days since the offensive started, General Zaluzhny understood that whatever plan they had on the table, it's garbage. It's absolutely useless. That Ukraine cannot advance even remotely and do the same that is even remotely planned. So whenever we're talking about anything that was pushed on Ukraine or tried to be critiqued on Ukraine or whatnot past this point is completely irrelevant, because at this point it took General Zaluzhny 4 days to understand that the whole nature of warfare has changed. And this is important because there are still both commentators, both analysts, and some of the US generals that are living in some dreamland scenario where this grand land maneuver warfare is still possible. And this was supplemented that in mid-October, Russia tried to do basically what Ukraine needed to do, like concentrate on a single place and push like extremely large amounts of armored vehicles and military into the defensive positions of the enemy. This is what US has planned for Ukraine to do, this land maneuver. And this is what Russia executed around Avdiivka. It ended up in stupendous casualties for Russia. In just a couple of days, Russia has sustained casualties that have not been seen before ever. That was what Russia took over a month since then to adapt. So since the 10th of October when Russia started this, it took them over a month to adapt. It took Zaluzhny 4 days to understand the same. This is a fundamental definition of where this war is. That's why Zaluzhny is stating that we have some certain problems, that there is a certain requirements to find a way out. But the point is that time and time again, when reality came, like when the push come to shove on a battlefield to check whether or not Ukrainians understand it correctly, we see that General Zaluzhny understood it correctly. And that US officials that are just saying, well, you should have just concentrated into one place and just attacked. They are they not seeing this? Are they not reading? Are they not looking at what Russia did? I was like, oh, but those were the Russians, if Ukrainians would do. Again, we're coming back to the training. We're coming back on what kind of forces we had. Russia still has certain air edge. Remember, Russia has more air assets than Ukraine. Russia has technically even more capabilities than Ukraine in certain aspects. So no, what Ukraine would have done would not be more successful. It just would be more devastating. And then we get into this article by Franz Stefan Gatti. Sorry for mispronouncing the name, it's cringe. It's in Foreign Policy. I'm also going to leave the link in the description. And he tries to paint a picture that no, General Zaluzhny maybe is not completely right in stating that the warfare has changed forever, that drones and modern technologies have changed warfare, that we have now in the era that maneuver warfare is not possible. And he makes claims, but it feels that he didn't critically assess those claims, because after he makes those claims, he disputes them and debunks them himself. But let's go over this because this is very relevant. So he talks about that the battlefield right now, the narrative specifically after Zaluzhny's article, is that the battlefield right now is transparent. And this is what the US generals are still struggling to understand. That right now, no major forces concentration is possible because the enemy can see everything. And once they see that you're preparing for some kind of a massive attack, they are already going to be ready. They will have fast responding surrounding forces on the ground, and they will have high precision mobile weapon platforms like drones and so on that can just strike and completely dismember any kind of advancing pushes. So he talks about the different factors that influence this. Specifically, he talks about that Ukrainians are using the time of day, that they can attack, for example, at night or at dawn, that sometimes the weather can be used to obscure certain offensive operations such as fog. He says that terrain can help execute certain operations. And this is funny. And then finally, he mentions that there are also jammers that can be used as a modern technology. So where is he wrong? Like, because Ukraine does attack during the morning, during the fog, and so on. They can use the weather. The problem with what he's saying, and specifically, is that he's talking about some small operations. Are we talking... And this is like the misunderstanding. What kind of a scale are we really talking about here? If this is indeed like an attack by a smaller group, maybe with a couple of vehicles, yes. But if we're talking about a massive maneuver breakthrough operations with tens, if not hundreds of vehicles that are pushing through the enemy fortifications, I'm sorry, do they just appear out of nowhere? Like, do they not get concentrated, or they just like charge from, I don't know, like from all sides and they just appear or dig out of the underground? The guy is stating here of the tactics that are used by Ukrainians, and he's trying to make claim, yes, but it's still possible to attack without completely ignoring that once you try do it on scale, and once you try to prepare this multi-month preparation offensive with wargaming, with many sides, with many possibilities of operations, with long logistical chains, with long preparation chains, with trying to concentrate your forces, concentrate troops, concentrate everything, he completely fails to acknowledge that it all will be seen by the enemy, and the enemy will be ready. It is that much. So what this draws me mostly to is that Zaluzhny was right. That even the analysts that are trying their best to like find any holes in the modern warfare, into modern situation, and find any kind of excuse for stating, no, maybe there is some option for to do this warfare. Even they cannot do this. And this is kind of the final point, the final, if you would put the nail into the perspectives of that, Ukraine should have just concentrated the forces in one place and attacked and broken through the enemy lines. And then today we would not be sitting thinking about what would Ukraine do and if Ukraine will win, which is a false narrative altogether. But instead we would be celebrating because Putin would be already at negotiating table, surrendering everything to Ukraine. What a load of nonsense. Absolute garbage. And the most important thing here about the jammers that he writes here, the jammers are a nice thing that we would be like, that this is something that can help the maneuver warfare. Well, it's cool, but are we talking about the future warfare? Because jammers and electronic warfare technologies are only now starting to appear in Ukrainian front lines at scale. They were not there in May, June. They were not there when the offensive was planned or even expected, and they were definitely not delivered. So if we're talking in a sense of the Ukrainian offensive, then it was not there. And if we're talking about something for the future, well, didn't General Zaluzhny, after seeing what happens on the battlefield for 4 days, clearly stated later in The Economist that, hey, we need a technology that will help us get over this weird semi-stalemate where we cannot break through this transparent battlefield. I mean, this is what Zaluzhny said. Am I crazy or not? I hope this video helped you get a new perspective on the situation in Ukraine and the offensive that happened this year. Please check out the shop. I think it's great. I think it's cool. Support the armed forces of Ukraine. I love you. Slava Ukraini. Ali, get well. And I'll see you next time.